In my last video, I argued that rookie picks are the most important asset in Dynasty. And in the process, I highlighted the unique risk that young players pose to our Dynasty rosters, especially the ones that haven't truly broken out yet. But as I acknowledged in that video, we can't avoid all young players, or at least I don't think that we should avoid all young players. My rosters are typically overweight on rookie picks and rookies and veterans, but I do still invest in year 2 and year 3 breakout candidates when the price is right. So today, let's talk about some year 2 and year 3 players that I am willing to roll the dice on in 2024. Okay, guys, bear with me. I've got a couple of big announcements to make today. The first one is that I am now doing some Dynasty video content for Fantasy Points. Now, to be clear, this is not going to change anything about what you should expect from this channel. But if you want to see more of me, you should subscribe to the Fantasy Points YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description. And you should go over to the Fantasy Points website as well. They have a lot of great resources over there, great articles. I'm going to be citing an article today, actually written by my friend Ryan Heath. If you want to sign up for any of the plans at fantasypoints.com/plans, you can use my promo code PURE10. You can get 10% off, and I get a little cut too. So that's a good way to show your support to me as well. So just wanted you guys to know I'm excited about the videos I'm doing over there at Fantasy Points. And again, use my promo code PURE10 if you want to sign up for the Fantasy Points data suite, their DFS package, the NFL general package, whatever you want. And the second announcement is more directly related to this channel. I've had some people in the comments over the past couple of weeks asking me if I have a Discord server. And I thought, why not? Why shouldn't we have a place that we can gather to talk Dynasty strategy, do trade polls, hang out on game days, and just kind of get better at Dynasty together, have a good time doing it. So there is a link in the description to the Discord. It's free to join. I hope I'll see you in there. I've also put together a bunch of my favorite fantasy football and Dynasty resources that are in there, including the wide receiver buckets that I talked about a couple videos back that my friend David created. So kind of a curated list of my favorite resources that you can find online. And if you do join, you'll see some locked members only channels. I'm working on putting those together, and they should be available before the season starts. So again, link in the description for fantasypoints.com/plans and the new Pure Potential Discord server. I appreciate you sticking with me through all that. Now let's get into the video. All right, so let's talk about some year 2 and year 3 players that I am investing in Dynasty. We're going to start with the most expensive player on the list, which is Achane. According to Dynasty Data Lab, Achane is currently the 407 in Dynasty Startups. He's the 8th running back off the board. He turns 23 in October of this season, and he's going into his second year after arguably the most efficient rookie running back season that we've ever seen. Now, in a lot of cases, when we see outlier efficiency from a player, that is a regression signal. And it's not necessarily the best idea to go chasing that efficiency because players are often overpriced in those scenarios. But with Achane, even though I think he is primed to regress from where he was last year, I don't really think that his efficiency from his rookie season is baked into his cost. If we expected Achane, or I should say if the market expected Achane to keep doing what he did last year in his limited sample of games, he'd probably be a borderline second round startup pick. He'd be going around Jahmyr Gibbs. But the market is already concerned about the size, about the injuries, and about this touchdown efficiency, this big play efficiency that they're expecting to regress. And the thing is, he is going to regress. You can't keep up the type of efficiency we saw from Achane last year. You know, the fantasy points per touch, it's just not going to keep up. But a dip in efficiency doesn't necessarily mean a dip in scoring. So earlier I mentioned Ryan Heath from Fantasy Points. He wrote an article about weighted opportunities, which is a metric that assigns value to carries, targets, and red zone touches, trying to more accurately quantify what each of those is worth in terms of fantasy production, and then combining those together so that each player can have a weighted opportunity score. It gives you like a clearer idea of what we should expect from players based on the types of roles that they have, right? What percentage of the more valuable touches are they getting? Because 50 carries between the 20s, it's not at all the same as 50 targets. So you have to differentiate the values of those two things. That's where weighted opportunity comes in. That's what Ryan's article is about. And in his blurb about Achane, he took a look at extremely efficient rookie running back seasons since 2014. He measured efficiency by looking at the difference between points per game and this weighted opportunities per game. And he took all the running backs that were plus 2.5. In other words, 2.5 points per game better than their weighted opportunities. Now, of the players on this list, J.K. Dobbins missed his entire second season with a knee injury. He hasn't been able to stay healthy since, unfortunately. But the rest of this list, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson, Jonathan Taylor, Todd Gurley, all of these guys saw a significant increase in their weighted opportunities per game from year 1 to year 2. And 4 of those 5 scored over 20 points per game in year 2. Todd Gurley didn't, despite having a ton of volume, because his offense under Jeff Fisher was just horribly designed and inefficient. But these running backs that we've seen have these absurdly efficient rookie years, they go on to have much larger opportunity shares in their second seasons. And this makes perfect sense, right? Coaches want the best players to touch the ball. So when a rookie comes out and just blows the league out of the water with efficiency, they make big plays, they score touchdowns. Yeah, coaches are going to work to get them more involved in the following season. So I'm certain that Achane's efficiency will come down in 2024, but I'm almost as certain that his opportunities are going to go up. Ryan mentions in his article that Achane only received 42% of the Dolphins' weighted opportunities in 2024, while we have other guys like Isaiah Pacheco, Travis Etienne getting up to 70%. So there's a lot of room for growth here. I would expect Achane to enter the season in like a 50-50 split with Mostert, but I won't be surprised at all if he takes over a larger share as the season goes on. And we have to remember that Mostert is a 32-year-old running back who has an extensive injury history of his own. And last year was really his only impressive season on his resume. So it's not like he's this proven bell cow back that's always been an obstacle for young running backs. I think it's very conceivable that Achane is the 1A starting in week 1. So I'm very intrigued by Achane's upside. I think he's extremely talented, but the question is, what are we willing to give up to acquire him? Achane's actually the only player on the list today that I'm willing to send a base first for. And if you missed my definition of base firsts, go ahead and watch my last video. I explained it in detail. I did actually trade a first for Achane in a league where I had an extra first. My team was above average in buying power, but I had a pretty big hole at RB2. I wanted to go out and get a legit running back, like someone with actual ceiling potential, because I had the value that I could spend, but I went to the CMC, the Bijan, the Brees Hall, the Jahmyr Gibbs managers. None of them were interested in making a deal. And so I went to my next guy. I went and tried to see, what's the HM manager want. In the end, they wanted one of my 2 first-round picks. So I was willing to part with that pick. But when you're going about these types of deals, you always want to start with players. Try to make these deals involving players and don't trade away your firsts unless you really have to. In terms of players, I value Achane ahead of Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Jared Goff, Travis Kelce, Josh Jacobs, Jordan Addison. When you're forming a trade, maybe you have to add a little plus on your side, or maybe you can get a plus for some of these guys. You can kind of adjust as the situation calls for, but I think you can build a trade around any of those assets and you can make something work to get Achane on your team. Next up is James Cook, who is the 605 in startups. He's the 15th running back off the board. And I've never really been a James Cook guy. I didn't think he had an impressive college profile. I was shocked when he went in the second round. I continued looking for reasons to fade him. Oh, he's undersized, this and that. I've kind of come around, not necessarily on the ceiling case. I do think the ceiling for James Cook is pretty capped, but he has fallen to a spot where I think he is a good value and he fits a lot of different team builds. Last season, he averaged 14 carries and a little over 3 targets per game in a Josh Allen offense. He scored about 14 points per game, which isn't amazing, but I do think he has room for growth from there. Once Joe Brady took over in week 11, we saw James Cook's target share go up. His targets per route run went way up. His first read target share went up. So the team was designing more passing plays to go to James Cook. That is a skill set that he has. He kind of struggles with drops actually, but the other aspects of being a receiver, he does excel at. And then you look at what the team did this offseason. They trade away Diggs. They let Gabe Davis walk. They bring in Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel. I'm pretty confident that those 2 guys are going to combine for fewer targets this year than Diggs and Davis did last year. So I think there is room for Cook to take on a pretty large role in the passing game, maybe even push like a 14-15% target share as kind of a ceiling outcome. Obviously, the big red flag with Cook is that he doesn't get goal line work, and he's not going to get it. He had 14% of the Bills inside the 5 carries last year. Josh Allen always takes a lot of that work, and they brought in Ray Davis this offseason, who's probably going to fit into that like Latavius Murray role, and he's going to take a lot of that short yardage stuff. So I'm never going to project James Cook to score like 8 rushing touchdowns, but he only had 2 all of last season on over 200 carries. So I definitely think it's possible for him to get to like 5 or 6, especially if he can break off some longer runs. And you look at, combine that with an increase in passing work, I think 16, 17 points per game is totally realistic for him. Probably a long shot to get up over 18, but I think at his current cost, you're buying a little bit of certainty at running back, and you're not really paying that much to do it. Like you look like a round and a half after Achane, you very much have guys that are year to year. Guys like Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon. Maybe they're capable of scoring a little bit more this year than Cook, but with Cook being under contract for at least the next 2 seasons with Josh Allen, I think you're locking in a pretty solid floor at your RB2 spot. Like I said, with a little bit of upside there, I think he functions as kind of a 1 or 2 year rental for your team where you know you're getting this RB2 production, possibly low end RB1 production, and he's not really going to lose any value because he's still pre-age apex. He's still under contract in a good offense. As far as what I would offer, well, I prefer James Cook straight up to Rachaad White and Josh Jacobs, who are typically valued ahead of him. So I think you could move down from those guys. I'm also totally fine moving like a JSN, Jordan Addison, Jaden Reed type of wide receiver. And you could also try packaging a second round pick with a lesser running back like a Devin Singletary, a Jerome Ford, a Kendre Miller, a Zach Moss, something like that. I think those are all ways. I wouldn't send out a first for him, but there's a lot of other creative ways that I think you can get James Cook on your team. And like I said, he can fill a role for you for a couple of seasons at least. So I'm now realizing that this is just becoming a list of undersized running backs, but I'm just going to lean into it here because my next guy is Tyjae Spears. Spears is coming off the board as the 10th pick of the 9th round in startups. He's the RB26. He just turned 23 years old. He's going into his second season, and he's valued around a bunch of running backs that I think are good bets. He's valued around like Najee Harris and Tony Pollard and David Montgomery and a bunch of running backs that I think are totally fairly priced, and you can build a competent running back room without spending a lot in that 9th to 12th round of startups. But most of those players are older veterans that are kind of year-to-year bets. Either they don't have contract security or they have talent concerns. Maybe they're declining. They all serve a purpose, but I don't think any of them are really poised to gain value in the future. Whereas I think Spears, depending on how things break for him this season, could be a big riser in ADP. He is an intriguing young option who's just not that expensive to acquire. He finished 9th among all running backs in targets last season on a team that was dead last in pass attempts. So he was consolidating a lot of the Titans passing game around him as a rookie, even having to share a backfield with Derrick Henry. He was also 5th in explosive run percentage, and just watching him, the dude seems to be able to make people miss. He has a propensity for making some big plays. I think he's an exciting player. Now we know Tony Pollard got the big contract, or said big contract for a running back, and he probably is like the 1A in the offense heading into week 1. But the coaching staff has already mentioned that they view Pollard and Spears as kind of interchangeable talents. They can do the same things. So it's not going to surprise me at all if they enter the season in like a true 50-50 split. And yeah, there's a world where Tony Pollard like bounces back to his pre-2023 form because he's healthy now. And maybe he does take over a large portion of this, and Spears is kind of relegated to a backup role for a year or two. But I think there's also a world where Tony Pollard is just over the hill, washed up, and he ends up like the Miles Sanders of this season, where he starts out the year as the guy who got paid, the guy who gets the ball, but then this other running back just sort of forces him out of the picture. I think that's totally viable. And again, at the cost of Spears right now, I'm totally fine making that bet. I'm not saying Tony Pollard is unrosterable. I'm just allowing myself to envision two possibilities, and neither of them is cost prohibitive. So I'm interested in both guys. But I do prefer Spears straight up just because he's many years younger than Tony Pollard. And I want to bet on talent in this kind of ambiguous situation where I think we have an offense that's poised to make a lot of improvements. And if not like actual improvements, at least is going to throw the ball a lot more under Brian Callahan, which is going to help Spears as a guy who gets a lot of targets already. So I would very easily go out and trade a future second, even a second and a third for Tyjae Spears if you can get that done. Otherwise, you could offer one of those dusty veteran running backs for somebody like Spears. Maybe you have too many of those guys on your roster and you feel like you can go flip an Alvin Kamara or something for Tyjae Spears. That seems like a good move to kind of reset the clock, get a little bit younger. And I'm also just going to throw out Zamir White because he's going about 8 picks ahead of Spears in startup ADP. I would much rather have Spears. So just get him out of here. If you can trade Zamir White straight up for Tyjae Spears, that's probably a very specific suggestion, but I would recommend it. All right, we're going to get away from running back here. I've got one wide receiver and one tight end for you to close things out today. I was thinking about doing Rashee Rice or Tank Dell, but I already talked about those guys in my wide receiver rankings video that came out the other week. So you can just go check that out. I'll put a link in the description if you want to hear about Rice, Dell, and a bunch of other wide receivers that I like. But in terms of another young wide receiver that I think is a worthy investment in Dynasty, I'm going to go with Josh Downs. who was surprisingly low in the startup ADP when I went and checked, going in the 12-10 as the 53rd wide receiver off the board. Downs is going into his second season with the Colts. Obviously, Anthony Richardson at quarterback. You've got Michael Pittman and AD Mitchell as his main wide receiver competition. Downs had a really productive college career playing with Drake May. I liked him a lot as a prospect. He had a fine rookie season. His 17.9% target share, virtually identical to like JSN, Addison, Jaden Reed, 1.6 yards per route run on the season, which certainly isn't phenomenal, but better than JSN and Addison. Higher targets per route run than both of those guys as well. It just feels like his season was like pretty comparable to those guys, but he goes 6 rounds after them for some reason. And I don't really know why. I mean, Jaden Reed might also be a slot only wide receiver. I don't know why he is so much more valuable than Downs, but the discrepancy between those players is what makes me want to bet on Downs so much more. Now, I will say, I know there's massive concerns about Anthony Richardson's passing ability. Can Josh Downs get on the field in 2 wide receiver sets? I don't know the answer to those questions, but he graded extremely well in reception perception. Matt Harmon absolutely loves Josh Downs. So we've got the college production. We have the rookie year production being adequate. His rookie year charting data looks great. For what it's worth, he did run 65 routes outside as a rookie, and that's a very small sample, but just for what it's worth, 0.34 targets per route run and 2.5 yards per route run on those routes. Those are ridiculously good numbers. I doubt that they would scale well if his outside role were to expand significantly, but it at least suggests that he can play outside if he's asked to. Like if he was totally incapable of running routes outside, I think his numbers would look a lot worse. So just something to keep in mind. And AD Mitchell, very sketchy prospect. Like I think he has upside, but his production in college was terrible. He fell further in the draft than he was expected to. All reports say he's doing well in training camp, and that's all fine and good. I think he's interesting as well, but I'm not ruling out Downs just because we're penciling in AD Mitchell as the starter in 2 wide receiver sets. I think it can go a lot of different ways. So I definitely think Downs is a good tier down option from those JSN, Addison, Reed type of wide receivers. I'm really not trying to roster those guys if I can avoid it. On an aging roster, you could also look at trying to move like an Amari Cooper, Hollywood Brown, Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, Christian Kirk, try to get a plus on top, buy back some age with a talented young wide receiver in Downs who does have room to grow. And then finally, I would send anything short of a second on top of like Khalil Shakir, Romeo Dobbs, Jahan Dotson, Josh Palmer to get into a legit talented receiver with upside. I don't want those lower tier guys on my roster. I think that they're cloggers. I don't ever want to start them. So I'd like to give up something to kind of upgrade into Downs. And they seem to be within striking distance based on the startup ADP. And finally, we come to my last guy, my lowest conviction guy, really, which is Luke Musgrave. He's the tight end 18 in startup ADP right now, going in the 12th round. He's going into his second season in Green Bay after being a second round pick last year. Once David Njoku comes off the board in startups in like round 8, the whole position is just a wasteland. You've got Ben Sinnott and Pat Freiermuth in that range with Luke Musgrave that do offer some theoretical upside. And I do like those guys just a little bit more than Musgrave. But Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz, and Dallas Goedert are all going ahead of him. That's my least favorite group of tight ends to pick from. You just know that you're not really getting any kind of upside with those guys. They're never going to be difference makers. They're not going to gain a lot of value. I think you're just better off punting your tight end and having like Tyler Conklin or Noah Fant, honestly. But when you get to Luke Musgrave, then I'm a little bit intrigued. I don't have some miracle stat that Luke Musgrave's like the next Travis Kelce or anything, but he is an athletic freak who had second round draft capital. He's in an offense with an exciting young quarterback, and the depth chart is wide open. We don't have any established star wide receivers in Green Bay. There's a lot of targets that are going to be up for grabs. Musgrave got hurt in week 11 of his rookie season, but to that point, his numbers looked totally fine for a rookie tight end. 0.19 targets per out run, was just ahead of Dallas Goedert. It was exactly the same as Jake Ferguson, slightly behind Dalton Kincaid, nearly identical yards per out run to Dallas Goedert and Jake Ferguson as well. So I think at the very least, we're looking at like a competent tight end. The big question mark is Tucker Kraft, who was also a rookie last year. He filled in for Musgrave when Musgrave got hurt. He looked fine in that role. The biggest concern is that they like platoon these guys and they play both of them. And because of that, neither of them are very useful. And that's totally possible. That's part of the risk that you're undertaking with Musgrave. But I do think Musgrave is the more natural receiver out of the two of them. And Tucker Kraft is dealing with an injury this offseason. He's not practicing. I think it's possible that Musgrave just takes on a full role in week 1 And if he plays well, that he just doesn't relinquish it. So I do think he's cheap enough to bet on in a range of tight ends that are just sorely lacking in upside. As far as what I'd give up, I would start with those Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz, Dallas Goedert types. See what you can get on top of those guys to move down to Musgrave. You could also try giving up like a Russell Wilson or Gardner Minshew type if you're not banking on that early season quarterback production, and I hope that you aren't. Or you could try it at another position like a Jerome Ford or a Jalen Wright, something like that. Guys valued in that like late second, early third range seem to be about right for Musgrave's value. And that's it. That's 5 young players that I think are worth investing in Dynasty at their cost. See, I don't just roster rookie picks. I do roster players too. If you've stuck around to the end, please hit that subscribe button so I can keep making Dynasty content for you. Check the description if you want to go over to fantasypoints.com/plans. Get any of their plans with my promo code PURE10 for 10% off. And finally, join the Pure Potential Discord. It's going to be a good time. You don't want to miss it. So go check that out as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.